You never truly know how much power you carry within until the world tries to break your spirit. We bring you the most inspiring tales of silent warriors who rose from the ashes of defeat to claim their victory. Subscribe today and find the fire inside your own heart.
My mother grabbed the microphone at my brother's wedding and said, into a room full of 200 people, "We are so proud of the man Adrian has become. And we're so grateful he found Hannah. Honestly, we always worried he'd end up alone. Unlike his sister, who we're still waiting on. Unlike his sister, who we're still waiting on." She laughed. My dad laughed. Half the room laughed because they didn't know what else to do. I was sitting at table 11, not the family table. Table 11, near the back, next to my brother's college roommate and his girlfriend who I'd never met. I had flown in from Portland. I had bought a dress I couldn't afford. I had gotten my hair done that morning at a salon downtown because my mother had texted me 3 days before the wedding saying, "Please don't show up looking like you just rolled out of bed like last Christmas." I smiled through it. I picked up my champagne glass, and I stared at the centerpiece. White roses, eucalyptus, a little candle. And I did not cry. I told myself, do not give them the satisfaction. Do not be the story people tell on the drive home. But I heard it, every word. And so did everyone at my table. My brother's roommate leaned over and said quietly, "Did she just?" "Yeah," I said, "she did. That was 6 years ago." And it took me a long time to understand that moment wasn't an accident. It wasn't a bad joke or a slip of the tongue after too much champagne. It was just my family, finally saying out loud what they had always said with their eyes. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the before. I'm the older one. People always assume it was the other way. That maybe I was the baby, the spoiled one, the difficult one who came along and disrupted a perfect family. But no. I'm 3 years older than my brother. I was there first. And somehow from the very beginning, that didn't seem to count for anything. My brother's name is Adrian. He's tall, charming, the kind of person who walks into a room and people just turn. He was the athlete. He was the one with the group of friends who came over every weekend and filled the house with noise that my parents called energy and life. When he got a B on a test, my dad would slap him on the back and say, "Next time, champ." When I got a B, my mother would sit down across from me at the kitchen table and say, in that particular voice of hers, "I just worry you're not applying yourself." I applied myself constantly. Constantly. I was in the honor society. I worked a part-time job at 16 to save money because I figured out early that depending on my parents for anything came with a cost I wasn't always willing to pay. I got into a good school. I studied communications, graduated in 4 years, moved to Portland for a job at a nonprofit I actually believed in. None of it was ever quite right. Communications? My mother said when I told her my major. "What are you going to do with that?" "Portland," my father said when I told him about the job. "Why so far?" My brother dropped out of college after 2 years, traveled around Europe for 8 months on money my parents gave him, came back, and eventually got a job through a friend of my dad's at a logistics company. They talked about him like he'd climbed Everest. I don't say this to make Adrian the villain. He wasn't. He was just the one they chose. Families do that sometimes. They pick. And it doesn't always make sense from the outside. It doesn't always make sense from the outside either. What I know is that growing up there was a version of my family that existed in public, warm, funny, close-knit. And then there was the version I lived in. The one where I was always slightly wrong. Too serious. Too sensitive. Too much of something, and not enough of something else, depending on the day. "You take everything so personally," my mother used to say. I learned to take nothing personally. I learned to need very little. I learned to be fine with being fine, because anything more than fine seemed to require things from them I wasn't going to get. The wedding was in October. Adrian had been with Hannah for 4 years. She was lovely, genuinely lovely, and I liked her immediately when we met at Thanksgiving 2 years before. She had this way of filling silences that wasn't awkward. She'd just ask a real question, something you actually had to think about, and then she'd listen to the answer. I remember thinking, she has no idea what she's walking into, not with Adrian, but with the rest of it. I flew in Thursday evening. The rehearsal dinner was Friday. My mother had organized the weekend down to the minute, and she had texted me the itinerary with the note, "Please read through so there are no surprises." I read through it and noticed that there was no bridesmaid role for me. Adrian hadn't asked me to be in the wedding party, which was fine. I told myself, he had his college friends, whatever. But there was also no mention of me in the toasts, no role in the ceremony, not even a reading. I was listed in the seating chart my mother emailed as Adrian's sister in the notes column, like a footnote. I told myself, it's not about you, it's his day. Be happy for him. I was happy for him, I genuinely was. The rehearsal dinner was at a steakhouse downtown. I sat at the far end of the long table and talked to Hannah's aunt from Minneapolis for most of the night, who was funny and sharp, and kept refilling my wine glass. My parents sat at the center of the table and held court. My dad gave a toast about Adrian, a long one, a good one actually, full of real memories, the kind of specific details that make people laugh and then go quiet for a second. He mentioned the time Adrian got lost on a camping trip when he was 9 and walked out of the woods 2 hours later carrying a turtle he'd found. He mentioned the time Adrian called him from a payphone in Paris at 3 a.m. because he'd lost his wallet. He didn't mention me. Not once. Not even "and of course Big Sister is here." Nothing. I drove back to my hotel that night and sat on the edge of the bed in my coat and stared at the wall for a few minutes. Then I texted my best friend Vera. Not Vera from the list. Wait, I cannot use that name. My best friend who I'll call Nadia. I texted Nadia and said, I think I might not go tomorrow. She called me immediately. You're going? She said. You're going because you'll regret it if you don't. And because Hannah deserves to have you there, even if they don't deserve to have you there. You're going, and you're going to be fine. My dad didn't mention me once in his toast. Silence. Not even once? Not even once. Okay, she said. I'm sorry. That's awful. But you're still going. I went. The ceremony was beautiful, Hannah cried. Adrian cried, which I had never once seen him do, and it cracked something open in my chest a little. He was my brother. Whatever else was true, he was my brother. And he was happy. And I was glad he was happy. I sat in the third row on the groom's side, alone in my row for a few minutes, before a couple I didn't recognize sat down at the other end. The reception was at a vineyard about 20 minutes from the church. I found my table, 11 near the French doors that led to the patio, and I ordered a club soda, and I talked to my seatmates, and I ate the salmon, and I watched my family across the room be the version of themselves that they put on for company. Then came the toasts. My dad went first, a shorter version of the rehearsal dinner speech. My mother went second. She was halfway through something genuinely nice. About Hannah. About being grateful for her. About welcoming her into the family. When she made this little pivot. The kind of pivot I recognize now, because I'd seen it 100 times. A tiny shift, a small laugh, and then her voice changed just slightly. We have always wanted the best for our children, she said. Both of them. She looked over at me when she said, both of them, and smiled. The smile looked like warmth from a distance. I know what it actually was. Adrian found his path, as we always knew he would. As for his sister, another laugh, softer, like she was letting people in on something. We're still rooting for her. She's always been the one we couldn't quite figure out. Not as brutal as I made it sound at the beginning, but also in a room full of people, at her son's wedding, looking directly at me. The polite laughter that followed felt like something physical. I felt it in my sternum. I did not cry. I picked up my club soda. I looked at the centerpiece. I thought about the eucalyptus. After the toasts, I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink for a few minutes. A woman came in. One of Hannah's cousins, I think, and she looked at me in the mirror and said, "Are you okay?" "Fine," I said. "Just needed a second." "Your mom is something else," she said, not meanly, almost gently. "Yeah," I said, "she really is." I went back to table 11. I stayed through the cake. I hugged Hannah. I hugged Adrian, and he held on a beat longer than I expected and said, "I'm glad you came." And I think he meant it. I think he always existed in a slightly different version of our family than I did, not untouched but differently shaped by it. I drove back to my hotel at 10:30. I flew home the next morning. And somewhere over the Rockies, looking at the clouds below me and the plastic cup of ginger ale on my tray table, I made a decision. I was done. Not done, not forever, I thought at the time, but done in the way of, I am not going to keep showing up to things where I am the footnote. I am not going to keep flying across the country to be the punchline at other people's celebrations. I am not going to keep pretending that the laughter doesn't land. I did not call my mother to discuss it. I did not write a letter. I just quietly stopped being available. I stopped answering the phone on Sunday afternoons. I let texts sit for days, then weeks. I came up with reasons not to make it home for Christmas that first year. And then the year after, I just didn't offer a reason at all. My mother called it a phase. I know this because she called Adrian and told him, and Adrian called me and said in his careful way, "Mom thinks you're going through something." "I'm fine," I said. "She thinks you're mad about the toast." "I'm fine," I said again. He let it go. He was always better at letting things go than I was. 6 years is a long time. I want to be honest about what those 6 years looked like, because this is not a story about 6 years of triumph where everything worked out perfectly the moment I walked away. It wasn't like that. The first year was the hardest. I had more space than I'd ever had, and I didn't know what to do with it. I'd spent so long managing myself around my family, calibrating, preemptively shrinking, bracing, that when the management stopped being necessary, I sort of didn't know who I was without it. I went to therapy. I'm not embarrassed to say that. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Something. It doesn't matter, and she had this habit of repeating my sentences back to me as questions, which I found maddening for the first 3 months and then invaluable for the 3 years after. I changed jobs. I left the nonprofit. I still believe in the work. I just needed to not be broke. And I went to work for a mid-sized marketing firm in Portland that had a real salary and health insurance, and a team of people I genuinely liked. I made friends who didn't know my family, friends who knew me only as the person I was right now, not the person I had been arranged to be. I started running, which I'd always told myself I hated. Turns out I had just hated running with people who made it competitive. Running alone in the early morning, before Portland woke up, with just the sound of my own breathing and the wet pavement and the occasional dog that I loved. I ran my first half marathon at 31. I cried at the finish line and texted Nadia a photo, and she texted back a string of capital letters that took up 3 lines. I dated. Some of it was good. Some of it was the particular kind of bad that teaches you things. I'm still learning, honestly. I'm not in a relationship right now, and I'm okay with that in a way that would have confused my earlier self. I was okay, more than okay, most of the time. I built a life that was mine in a way nothing had ever quite been mine before. And then my phone lit up on a Tuesday in March, 8:15 in the morning, while I was eating toast in my kitchen. It was my mother. Not a text, a call. I stared at her name on the screen for 5 full rings. Then I picked up. "Your father had a heart attack," she said. No hello, no preamble. Just that. My toast sat on the plate getting cold. My kitchen was very quiet. "Is he alive?" I said. "Yes. He's in the hospital. They caught it. He's going to be okay, they think." But it was serious. Her voice was different than I remembered it. Smaller. Like something had been let out of it. "Which hospital?" She told me. I wrote it down on a notepad I keep by the coffee maker even though I didn't need to. I just needed something to do with my hands. "I'll come," I said. She didn't say thank you. She said, "Okay." And then she said almost as an afterthought, it would mean a lot. To him. Not to her, to him. I noticed that. I noticed it and I let it sit. I drove. I didn't want to fly. I needed the hours, the transition, the time to think. 12 hours with the radio and the highway and the mountains giving way to plains. I stopped twice. I called Nadia from a rest stop in Idaho and she said, "How are you?" And I said, "I don't know yet." "You don't have to fix anything," she said. "You're not going to fix anything in one trip." "I know." "You're just going to go see your dad." "I know." "And one daughter is a doctor." "I know," I said. "I know. I just needed to hear your voice." I got to the hospital late that night. My mother was in the waiting room, smaller than I remembered. She'd always seemed large to me, not physically, but in the way she occupied space, the way she could make a room orient around her, and she looked like a woman who had been sitting in plastic chairs for 2 days, which she had. She stood up when she saw me. I had thought in the car about what I would do. Whether I would hug her. Whether I would make it easy or make it hard. I hugged her. She held on a long time. "He's going to want to see you," she said into my shoulder. My father was awake, propped up in the hospital bed, with wires and a monitor and a dinner tray he hadn't touched. He looked smaller, too. He looks like my father, but quieter. Like someone had turned a dial down. "Hey, kid," he said when I walked in. I pulled the chair up and sat next to his bed, and we talked for almost an hour. Not about anything important. About the drive, about Portland, about a documentary he'd been watching before all this happened. Near the end, during a lull, he looked at me and said, "I'm glad you came." "Of course," I said. "I know it's not," he stopped, started again. "I know things have been." Dad. "I'm just saying I'm glad you came." "I know," I said. "Me too." I stayed 3 days. I slept in my old room, which my mother had converted into a craft room, but still had the original closet where I used to tape things to the inside of the door. The tape marks were still there. I found myself standing in front of that closet for a few minutes one morning, just looking at the outlines. My mother and I didn't have a conversation, not a real one. We were polite. We were careful. We moved around each other in the kitchen like we were both slightly afraid of what would happen if we stopped moving. On the last night, I was washing dishes after dinner. My father was home by then, installed on the couch with instructions to rest. And my mother came in and stood next to me and picked up a dish towel and just started drying. We washed and dried in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, "I know I haven't always," and then she stopped. I kept washing. I did not turn around. "I don't think I understood what you needed," she said finally. "I don't think I understood that what I was saying." Another stop. "Your father had a moment in the hospital. He said some things. Made me think." I set a pot in the drying rack. "I'm not asking you to forget anything," she said. "I know that's not." I just want you to know that I see it now. Or, I'm starting to. I turned off the water. I dried my hands. I turned and looked at her, and she looked back, and she looked old in a way she hadn't before the wedding. In a way that 6 years had done to her. In the same way 6 years does to everyone. I hear you, I said. That's all I get, not angry. Genuinely asking. For now, I said. That's what I have for now. She nodded. She folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. I drove back to Portland the next morning. The mountains were different. Going the other direction. Same mountains. Different light. I thought about my father's face when he said, "I'm glad you came." I thought about the tape marks in the closet. I thought about my mother at the sink. I didn't forgive everything. I want to be clear about that. There's a version of this story where a health scare becomes the thing that erases all of it. The wedding, the dinner table, the 1,000 small moments of being the one who didn't quite count. And everything goes back to whatever normal was supposed to be. That's not my version. What I did was decide to leave a door open that I wasn't sure I'd ever open. A door, not a gate. Not an invitation. Just the possibility that something might eventually be built that hadn't existed before. I called my mother from the road, not to say anything in particular, just to check that she was okay. She sounded surprised. Then she sounded like herself again, bossy and certain, asking if I'd stopped for gas, and whether I was eating enough. And I laughed a little, more at myself than at her, because even now, even after all of this, there is a part of me that still wants her to just be my mom. I don't know what that part of me is going to do with that. I'm still figuring it out. But for the first time in a long time, figuring it out feels like something I'm doing for myself. Not running from them. Not toward them. Just finding my own footing on my own ground. That's enough. For now, that's enough. I've thought a lot about what it actually costs to stay silent in a room full of people who are laughing at you. Not the dramatic cost, not the falling out, the years of distance, the 12 hours of highway between me and my childhood home. I mean the smaller cost, the one you pay in the moment, the decision to pick up your glass and look at the centerpiece and not let your face do what your chest is doing. I used to think that was weakness. Now I think it was the beginning of something I didn't have a word for yet. My mother didn't say anything terrible by the standards of terrible things people say. She didn't scream. She didn't name call. She just made a little joke at a microphone about the daughter she couldn't quite figure out, and 200 people laughed because that's what you do when someone with confidence says something into a microphone. One daughter is a docker. One daughter is a docker. That the laughter wasn't the wound. The wound was older. The laughter was just the moment I finally couldn't pretend I hadn't felt it. There's something that happens when you stop managing yourself around people who've always made you feel like too much and not enough at the same time. You get very quiet. And then, slowly, you get very clear. I didn't know who I was without the constant calibration, without the preemptive shrinking, the bracing. The way I'd walk into family events already preparing my exit. Figuring that out took longer than I expected and was less linear than any story makes it sound. There were months where the distance felt like freedom, and months where it just felt like loneliness wearing a different coat. What pulled me through wasn't a single decision or a revelation. It was smaller than that. It was running alone before the city woke up. It was a therapist who kept turning my sentences into questions until I had to actually answer them. It was Nadia on the phone from a rest stop in Idaho saying, "You just going to go see your dad?" It was the accumulation of small choices to be honest with myself, even when honesty was uncomfortable. Especially then. I think about my father in that hospital bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, saying, "I'm glad you came," in a voice that had something new in it. I think about my mother at the sink, not quite able to finish her sentences. Folding the dish towel, neither of them gave me what I'd spent years wanting: the clean acknowledgement, the specific apology, the moment where the accounting finally balances. That moment may never come. I've had to make peace with that. What I understand now is that the life I built in the years between the wedding and that phone call, the salary, the running, the friends who knew me without context, the therapy, the slow excavation of who I actually was, that wasn't a consolation prize. That was the point. You don't build a life waiting for someone else to validate the foundation. You lay it yourself. Even when your hands aren't steady. Even when you're not sure you're doing it right. My mother asked if that was all she got. For now, I told her. I meant it. Not as punishment. As truth. Some things get rebuilt in increments, or they don't get rebuilt at all, and either way you have to keep living forward. I called her from the road on the way home. She asked if I'd stopped for gas. I laughed a little. And I thought, this is not the ending I imagined. It's smaller and more complicated, and it doesn't resolve the way stories are supposed to resolve. But it's honest, and I've learned, the slow hard way, that honest is the only ground worth standing on.